All right, welcome back, everybody. Joe, Psychedelics Today here with Mitchell Gomez from DanceSafe, the executive director over there. He's got some really cool stuff happening around fentanyl safety, some fentanyl strips. Can you tell us about these?
Yeah, so this is a technology that has been around for quite a long time. In fact, immunochemistry, these are immunoassay strips. Immunochemistry is its whole own field of chemistry. It's the chemistry of immune systems. And because immune systems are so good at attacking one thing while ignoring everything else, you can use these immunoassay strips that have existed for a long time. You can design them to look for very specific chemical signals. You can design them to look for cancer proteins, for hormones that indicate pregnancy, for drug metabolites in urine. This is how urine test strips work. And now we actually have a test strip that has been developed that reacts with fentanyl, carfentanil, and a handful of other fentanyl analogs. It reacts with most of the fentanyl analogs that we've been seeing, and fentanyl is by far the most common adulterant that we've been seeing in these drugs. And so the way these strips work is that a chemical on the strip basically binds with fentanyl. You get a little color change that lets you know that this sample has fentanyl in it. It does not tell you a percentage or anything along those lines, but it does let you know it has it in there. And for anyone who doesn't know, fentanyl is a synthetic opiate that was developed for medical use. It's a very, very, very powerful drug, a drug that for somebody with zero opiate tolerance, somewhere between 1 and 3 milligrams, is probably enough to cause at least respiratory failure, if not cardiac arrest. And so it's a drug that often we are seeing is becoming a drug of abuse in its own right, people misusing fentanyl that is produced for medical purposes. It's also a drug that we are now seeing flow out of labs in both China and India, seem to be the hubs of where it's being manufactured in the black market, flowing through the black market and being cut into other substances or misrepresented as other substances. So for instance, we have seen heroin that is cut with fentanyl to increase the strength of the heroin. We've also seen fake Oxycontin, fake opiate pills that look just like any other opiate that are actually fentanyl. We have seen Xanax, fake Xanax press that looks like fentanyl. And now we've started to see fentanyl show up in drugs that don't really make any sense for it to be sold as. So we've started to see it in cocaine for sure. We have, at this point, far too many confirmed cases of people doing what they thought was cocaine. It often was cocaine. It was a bag of cocaine, but it had fentanyl in the bag. And we have quite a few deaths at this point where people thought they were doing just a line of coke and ended up doing a massive overdose of a synthetic opiate that was for some reason in that bag. We also have reports of it showing MDMA. That has not been confirmed in an independent lab at this point, at least to my knowledge. If anyone is aware of that, by all means send it to me. But we do have reports of people consuming what they believed was MDMA and suffering from opiate overdoses. The concern, of course, is always that maybe they didn't just take MDMA. Xanax is a drug that often gets used at the end of an MDMA experience, and so maybe they took a fake Xanax. That's another possibility that would explain MDMA and fentanyl in their autopsy report. But it is definitely showing up in drugs that don't make sense, and so I wouldn't be surprised in MDMA. And so by using these strips, for intramuscular or intravenous drug users, it's actually relatively easy. You cook it up in your cooker, and then you have your liquid that you're about to inject, and you can test that liquid. And it's a good way to do it because you really need to test every milligram of the substance you're consuming. For people who are using drugs that are historically powder drugs, things like MDMA and cocaine, if you want to be really, really careful, the ideal situation is to dissolve all of your sample into water, just enough to make sure that it's take a drop of that water, you add it to some other water, and you test it. And the instructions on how much to do this with all come with the test strips when you order them. These strips are accurate at such low doses of the sample that we do think that you could probably dump out a baggie. If you had a gram baggie with some powder in it, you could dump the baggie out, fill it with water, test the water, and potentially get a read. But that's not for sure. That's very speculative. We have not yet done a study. We helped organize and fund a peer-reviewed study to look at if these strips actually work at detecting fentanyl cut into heroin. So we know that they do that. We know that they work. How to test powder drugs is still very speculative. We're still working on it. But we strongly suspect that would be enough that you could just test your baggie. And as soon as we know for sure, we'll publish that study as well. But the tests exist. These are drugs that are really killing people in a way that doesn't make sense. They're killing a lot of people. And if you are a user of really, at this point, any recreational drug, you should be aware that there is a possibility that fentanyl might be cut into whatever it is you're consuming. Just because you did a bump out of the bag and you were fine does not mean the bag is fine. Because you're dealing with something that a milligram or two could kill you, it's very possible to miss it until you get to it. If it's 1 milligram powder and you're doing bumps out of the bag, it's very possible to not have it happen until you reach that 1 milligram. And so at this point, really any user of any recreational drug needs to know that the test strips exist. If you can get access to Narcan in your state, I highly recommend that you use it. And at this point, using any recreational drug alone is potentially a decision that could lead to the end of your life, because we just don't know why the fentanyl is showing up. We don't know why it's showing up in drugs like cocaine. And it's just something that's very important to know.
Absolutely. And one thing I've been hearing people say lately is if you can afford to ingest, you can afford to test. I think that's a good hashtag.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, stolen.
Yep. Cool. So everybody can check out those products on your DanceSafe website, dancesafe.org.
Yep.
And thanks for letting us know about it and really appreciate your work.
Yeah, thanks for talking to me.